Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. Well, I need to have another little rant. Well, it's not exactly a rant, but a chat. Somebody made a comment about the problem with classical music today. Of course, we all know it's full of problems. But the problem with classical music in the arts world is that it has become a, quote, branded commodity, unquote, with all of the pejorative inflections and shadings of meaning that branded commodity implies. Well, my response to that was just the opposite. The problem with classical music today is that it isn't enough of a branded commodity. And that's the idea I want to sort of propose in the following chat. Let's just take it from the top. What is a branded commodity? Well, actually, the person who was using the term, I don't think really knew. So that's part of it. A commodity, a good, something we use, something that's useful, something that has a marketplace. I mean, that's what a commodity is. Generally speaking, a good which does not have a well-defined identity in and of itself. In other words, one pork belly is the same as another pork belly. You know, crude oil is the same from wherever the crude oil comes from. It only acquires a brand, as this person said, a branded commodity, once it has been labeled or its producer affixes a certain specific label to it. But there is a larger issue. We'll get to the branded commodity part. We'll come back to it in a minute. And that's this. In the arts, it is very fashionable. Oh, it's so fashionable for artists to be, well, let's just say somewhat leftist, somewhat socialist. That is to deride capitalism. This is absolutely, totally ridiculous. First of all, most artists are not economists. They know nothing about economics. Second of all, artists have acquired this sort of left-leaning patina or ideology for a very simple reason, because most of them are starving and there's no market for what they do. And they feel entitled. They feel that the universe ought to support them in what they do, irrespective of whether or not it makes any money or anybody derives any substantial benefit from it. That is not a particularly capitalist perspective, right? I mean, the idea and the way that the arts have been set up, especially in Europe, which is where the whole sort of artistic ideology that we deal with comes from, is that the arts should be subsidized at taxpayer expense, and no amount of money flung at it is enough. I mean, that's always been the case. It's always been the case with the arts. The people who do it think that they're God's gift, and they think that they should be supported in whatever style they feel is luxurious or appropriate to their excellence and superiority to the rest of humanity. That is not an attitude conducive to a capitalist mentality. But here is the problem. And I mean this in just practical terms. There is no other system. I mean, capitalism is the best we've got. It may not always work. It may not always be fair, but it is the only way to maximize the amount of benefit the largest number of people can get at the best possible price. It's efficient and it allows people to make choices. And it is the only economic system that actually functions in a reasonably decent way. So, for people to start even having the conversation at this late day, I mean, I get it. I get it. Back in the days when Karl Marx was running around and most of the resources were owned by an inherited aristocracy, a landed aristocracy, and everybody else was excluded. And people had nothing. Okay, I get it. There were other economic systems that may have been interesting, but history has shown and the universe has demonstrated that if you're going to live in a reasonably democratic country or reasonably free society, then capitalism is the only economic system that makes any sense and that functions, and that's it. All these other ideologies are just bullshit and stupid, and it's really time people just sort of got over them. But artists have not. Artists have not, because they exist in a crevasse, in a wrinkle in the capitalist system, that wrinkle being the charitable or subsidized bit of it, which actually has a place. I'm not against subsidies for the arts. I'm not. I think they're extremely important. I think they should be supported. But it's how they're supported, number one. And second of all, it's the attitude of the people who participate in the arts. So that's the context in which we're operating. Now let's get to the part about branded commodities. Well, there's nothing wrong with having a brand. In fact, classical music, when it was most successful, you might argue in the 50s and 60s, when the LP first came out, when the technology and the great artists were there with just a few major labels who had them all. That was the high point of the classical music industry, when it was branded, when it was well branded. I mean, I remember an interview with somebody, I think it was with Leontine Price, where she talked about what a privilege it was to be an RCA Red Seal artist. I mean, artists were loyal to their labels, and their labels were loyal to them, and they were promoted accordingly. I mean, here, you see the remnants of branding. I just reached out for this. Arthur Rubinstein. Arthur Rubinstein was a Red Seal artist for his entire mature life. I know there are early recordings for like other labels, but as soon as the LP came in, he stuck with RCA for his entire career. And that was it. And they stuck with him. And that was why people know who he was. It was a good thing. It's nothing but a good thing. I mean, another example. This is really kind of fascinating. Actually, yes, this is very interesting to look at, because we have, wait a minute, let's see here. Oh my goodness, this is really interesting. There we go. Yes, Deutsche Grammophon, the yellow label. Yeah, I mean, to be on Deutsche Grammophon really, really meant something. And these recordings with this thing, this yellow signboard, this thing that they got their stuff on, that was the label. It's immediately identified as a measure of quality. And it's fascinating to see, if you look at how the label has devolved. Look, here we have Bernstein's White House Cantata on Deutsche Grammophon. Teeny, 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 tiny little Deutsche Grammophon. Who cares? And this one, James Levine and Yevgeny Kissin, the Met Orchestra. There's the DG on the spine. And there's a little teeny one at the back. That is the result of debranding. And it's sort of emblematic of what happened. Let me put these away. Of what happened to the classical music industry. It debranded itself. Well, that was stupid. I mean, that was absolutely the dumbest thing it could possibly have done. It made a mess of its recognition, its patina, its whole quality image. I mean, the label had a reputation. It meant something. Now, some of these labels, I mean, they're sort of drifting along on their reputations. It's still a big deal for an artist to get on Deutsche Grammophon, but because they have distribution. It's not because the label itself still means anything. I used to be able to have endless conversations with Wilma Cozart Fine, the leading light and producer of Mercury Living Presence, who always emphasized that what mattered was that the label had its own identity. It was a brand, and that brand had a catalog. And because that catalog had a brand attached to it, you could sell the catalog. Even people who didn't know the artists or didn't know the repertoire would buy the brand. You cannot overestimate the value of being a brand and the benefit. It's a 100% good thing. To speak of being branded, a branded commodity, with contempt is the most ignorant thing that you could possibly say about the need to sell, promote, bring classical music, find an audience for classical music, all of these things. They should want to be a branded commodity. Every single product in the world that is successful is branded. I mean, I used to work in brand management. I did this as a sideline, actually, because when I was a graduate student, I went to Stanford Business School just for fun to take marketing because I was a history person at Stanford. But I went to the business school, and the reason I went is because my next door neighbor in student housing was at Stanford Business School, and he was a brilliant marketing guy. He had a wonderful career. He just retired. He's still a friend. And he found me very useful because I like to write. I was a writer, and he needed people to do new product concepts. And when he started working, we were roommates for a while. We lived together in New Jersey, and he was working for Procter and Gamble and for Del Monte and all these companies. And he was doing new product concepts, and he had me working with him. Sort of on the side as a consultant. It was so much fun. I mean, we ran around doing focus groups, and one of the products that we worked on was Milk-Bone dog biscuits, which was just fabulous, absolutely fabulous. There was a division of Kraft, I believe, at the time. You know, his boss had the idea for mint-flavored Milk-Bones to make your dog's breath minty fresh. Well, that didn't work too well. And another brand that we worked on was A1 steak sauce, which was really fun. You know, we went to focus groups and talked to people about grilling behind one-way glass, and we would write new product concepts. I mean, the amount of effort and talent and skill and thought that goes into selling the meanest, least significant product is staggering. And I came to have such respect for the industry, for the people who really do their homework. They do their research. They ask people, what do you want? What should it look like? What should it taste like? How should we sell it? Where do you use it? How would you want to use more of it? It's extraordinary. And, you know, if you've worked in that business, you can't but just be fascinated by the amount of effort and real quantifiable data that gets processed in order to understand what people want and how to give them what they want at the best price and make money, and they get what they want and you make money, and it's fabulous. I can't even begin to tell you how fabulous it is and how interesting it is. And my issue with the classical music industry is that it has never undergone that kind of rigorous testing. I mean, you can get roach poison has a more rigorous scientific and economically rational foundation for how it's marketed and sold than does classical music. And the reason, of course, is part of that original sort of entitlement thing that we thought about, that we talked about just a few moments ago, that it's culturally significant, therefore it should sell itself, or it's self-evidently important, or that only utter Philistines would not understand how fabulous it is and want to fling money at it. Well, it's not that obvious. And there is nothing wrong, nothing with the proposition that if you want to reach a broader audience, then you have to reach out to that audience using the methods and systems that have been shown to be effective in selling and marketing your product. And there's nothing wrong with selling and marketing your product. You just have to know how to do it. You just have to not be a whiny little bitch or snob and assume that because people aren't lining up around the corner to grab whatever you're producing, that there's something wrong with them and not with you. So that is sort of, the point I wanted to make here. I really think it's a valid one, an important one, to understand that selling, commerce, capitalism, they have no particular moral qualities in and of themselves. It depends on how they're used. It depends on how well you use them. It depends on what you understand about them. It depends on your ability to take these tools, which is what they are, and turn them to positive use. I have no doubt that the classical music industry could do an awful lot better than it has been doing. I think everybody would agree with that. But the problem is not that it's operating in a capitalist system. The problem is that it has no clue how to operate in a capitalist system. And to complain about the system is just a height of foolishness because it's the only system there is. Remember, there's that wonderful, wonderful scene at the end of the movie The Lion in Winter, when Richard and John and Jeffrey are all in the basement and their father's about to come in to kill them, and they're, and Eleanor of Aquitaine shows up with knives, and Richard says something like, I'm not going to bow before him. I'm not going to beg for my life. And Jeffrey says, "Oh, you fool." As if the way you fall makes any difference, as if it matters. And Richard turns to him and says, "When the fall is all there is, it matters." It's when the air is all there is, there's nothing else to breathe. You breathe the air. Well, that's what it is economically. It's something that the classical music industry's never been able to take to heart. The fact that this is what it is, and you need to operate within the system. Don't like the system. Who cares? No one cares whether you like the system or not. It's there, and you can work it. You can work it to your advantage, but you got to know how. You got to go to school. You got to learn. You got to try and give people what they want. You have to make the case for what you are. And that was not even a question in the 1950s and 60s with the record industry. These labels had their identity, and that identity meant something. It meant something to consumers. It meant something to the labels. They had what's called brand equity, the value of being a brand with a certain quality image, a cachet. All of that's gone. It's going even faster now that everything is streaming, because how do you brand anything if it's streamed? I mean, what happens to the yellow Deutsche Grammophon thing? I mean, you see it on your computer, then you stream the thing. It's the last thing you see of it. I mean, it's a real problem. It's not an insurmountable problem, but people have to learn how to do it within the system that we have. And their constant moaning and complaining about it is one of the reasons that classical music is in the situation it's in. But also, consumers have to understand that they are operating within that system, and they have to buy and deploy their resources, that is their money, their time, their capital, strategically to send signals to the industry that this is the way we want to consume your product. It's a give and take sort of thing. So for someone to just say, well, the problem with classical music is that it's just a commodity, it's just branded, it's also just entertainment, as I pointed out many times. It is all of those things. And learning how to sell it correctly is the big question. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I do know what the problem is. That I do know. That I can assure you. So that's the rave. That's the point. We need more branding, more commodification. We need more, so that people begin to find products that they want to follow and enjoy and acquire. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's normal. Absolutely normal. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.